An elk hair caddis. Now, I don't know anybody that ties these. I don't know anybody that fishes these.
I do.
I do.
So does John. Everybody does. You don't either. You only fish blue wing olives. Don't give me that.
I got into a caddis, I think it was hatch.
Some things haven't changed, still picking on.
Doesn't change.
Best fun I ever had.
You catch a fish?
Can you explain the difference between them?
Okay.
Go ahead.
4 years ago.
I'm assuming you didn't hear that, so...
I only heard part of something, so say it out loud so that this is picked up by the video too.
Do you know the difference between a caddis and a mayfly?
Yes, I do. It depends on what you're looking for as to the differences, but a mayfly is an incomplete adult. It goes through an egg to a nymph to an adult to a subimago to an imago. An adult being a dun, and then that's a subimago, and an imago being a spinner. A caddis goes from an egg to a larva to a nymph, which is called a pupa in caddis imitation, to a dun to a spinner. So there's an extra spot in the caddis. For what we're concerned with, a mayfly is an upwing fly, a caddisfly is a downwing fly. Caddisflies you also see on riffles or dead water where fish are right near the bank and flies are right near the bank. Fish are there to feed on the flies. But they dart going downstream and they're very soft and quiet going upstream. You see scads of them around, but nobody fishes them, which is an impressive concept. Nobody fishes them. Frequently, they're the only insect hatching. They should be fished more often, but they aren't. Now, this happens to be a search fly of mine, a caddis fly. An elk hair caddis is a search fly. I'm going to tie it with yellow just because it's very visible. But most caddis flies are a very soft color. They're either dun or they're green, olive color. There's some blue in there, some not with blue in there, some with a cinnamon colored body, some with black bodies. But you'll find that the black bodied fly, what we would call black in an insect life, is really dark green. Because there's no such thing as black in nature. Black just doesn't exist. Even a black bear is not black. It's close, but no cigar. So when you're looking at a black fly, a chimera, something like that, a black caddis fly, they're really not black, they're green. And their nymph happens to be orange, by the way. But I'm going to tie yellow only because it's visible. And I'm going to use a white thread that disappears.
The sizes on the caddis, what sizes do they
Some people say as big as a 12. I think a 14 is more realistic, down to about a 22, except for October caddis, which are about a size 4. And they really come out in September and October. They're a big orange fly. But other than that, they're relatively small.
You've seen them actually down to 20s, 22s?
22s. Popcorn caddis are down to 22s.
Okay.
Caddis adults tend to have a large butt, so they follow the human beings very nicely. Right now I'm taking the dubbing out of the fur. This happens to be deer fur, not elk. But deer is better than elk, I think. Elk doesn't flare as much as deer does. But deer has more underbody or under fur. Now this is one of the few times I'm going to take a stacker and stack the hair. Only do that to wake John up. Notice I took the hair out in the same direction that I would be tying it on the fly. I can change hands much easier than I can change direction with deer hair. Any kind of a hair, it's difficult to change direction, but it's easy to change the length. And I cut everything off right at the hook and before I tie it in. That makes it easier to tie in.
The deer hair, is that body, base? Where
This is body.
body? Okay.
Deer hair has 5 different consistencies. Body is about what we want. Anything else, bucktail is part of a deer hair, could be a doe hair, could be a buck, doesn't matter. Bucktail is relatively thick and it doesn't flare. The rump hair flares but not well. The belly hair or body hair flares very well. As you get to the shoulders, it gets long and wiry. The mask is different than everything else. The mask makes good wings for comparadunts, which is probably a good time to talk about comparadunts.
Deer butchering
Okay,
on our way, so if you need whatever, you've got it.
deer butchers are a good person to know this time of year, because the trout season is over with. The season for hunting is done for deer, and they're butchering now.
Yeah, for most people.
For many people.
It's hard to hit that deer with a Chevy in the 3rd row of corn, isn't it?
Yeah, I got a red squirrel today.
Did you? It's tough chasing those up a tree, too.
I used to know some guys up in Alaska trying to deer around.
Okay, now this is not the best hackle. But as you see how long this hackle is, I'm going to make it a little shorter in a second.
Yeah,
No, it's 6 and 1/2 doesn't help. Use a pheasant tail whipper wings.
you brought the,
I use the recoil. I use
but you brought the pheasant tail all the way.
To the middle of the body. Okay, now I'll cut off this little bit of the hackle and I'll make it shorter. This also allows the hackle to support the fly in a skittering fashion, and you'll find that as you fish them, many caddis flies skitter. Now that's either while they're laying eggs or as they're hatching. If they're hatching, the weather is wet and not very sunny, the wings take a little while to dry, so they skitter around as they're running around and trying to get airborne. Or as they're hatching, caddis flies tend to hatch or place their eggs either by walking underwater. They fly to a small stick or something and they walk underwater and deposit their eggs on the stick. They could be skittering across the surface and laying eggs each time they skitter. Or they could be an adult and just, like most of us, just lay still and lay their eggs. It's an interesting concept. Also, caddis flies tend to lay eggs in riffles. So if you're fishing in the evening towards a riffle, right at the butt end of a riffle, you'll see an awful lot of caddis flies flying upstream and floating downstream. The floating downstream, these insects are available to trout, and trout will strike them. Sometimes they'll rip the rod right out of your hands. I mean, they're actively feeding. Sometimes fish are very delicately taking them, but they're taking them. This, however, is an elk hair caddis. Short wing, shorter body. The body is just to the bend of the hook or just beyond the bend. Short hook. The wing is just beyond the hook bend. And a hackle. They're simple to do.
No tail.
No tail.
Will you segment the body at times too?
You can segment the body, absolutely. I don't, but that doesn't mean it's right. It's not right. The bug itself is segmented.
So do you impart movement when you use this, or you just alternate?
I probably start out being dead drifted, and then alternating movement, and then pulling them under the water to see if they'll work under the water. Another reason for applying dry fly dope at the water rather than treating your flies before you go fishing. The fly will absorb water. Not very well, and it'll float just under the surface, but when I pull them under, they look like they're underwater.
So, like at the end of your swing is when you would try to pull it a little bit to get
Yeah.
under the water?
Yeah. So I'd float it dead, drift it a little bit, then pull it under.
Right.
And pull it back like a wet fly. There's nothing wrong, even though wet flies go the wrong direction, they come upstream when you're pulling them.
Right.
Fish strike anyway.
Right.
Fish aren't that smart. Their brain is very small. That's why we spend as much time and money learning to beat them at their own game.
Let me just ask a couple of questions. I read some articles where they say that once the caddis is hatched, it actually lives somewhat, I think, longer than the mayfly.
Yes,
And does it not come back actually just to drink at
It
times
does.
rather than when you're seeing it coming back?
when you see a large flight, they're coming back to lay eggs.
Okay.
But individually, yeah, the caddis flies are a wonderful searching fly. Just for that reason, because they come back to drink, they live a long time. They live up to a week, from what I understand.
Right. That's what.
Whereas mayflies live basically 24 hours. There is no mouth on a mayfly adult.
That's the literal translation for the Latin word, right? 1 day.
Yeah. Whereas this is a trichoptera hair wing. The wings are hairy. If you look at them under a microscope, they're studded with hairs.